Hey there, folks. Welcome to another installment of OU Insider Live, brought to you by Jani-King. And if you're not familiar with the good folks at Jani-King, let me get you familiar with them. They are the greatest team to ever clean and a proud partner of OU Athletics as well. They deliver spotless results from stadiums to any size business across the country. You can check them out at janiking.com for unbeatable commercial cleaning services. That is JANIKING.com. And that, folks, is Jesse Crittenden. I am Parker Thune. This is OU Insider Live. For those of you that tune in on a regular basis, you know the drill. We're going to talk OU football and recruiting for an hour extemporaneously in real time with you, interacting via the chat. Now, if you have a question that you would like answered, or you have an opinion that you would like us to weigh in on, give it to us in super chat form. You can attach any financial contribution, be it $1 or $10 or whatever you feel compelled to throw our way. We're going to do our best to dig into the standard chat, but there are so many messages that accumulate over the course of one of our streams that we just can't get to them all. But we do make the promise to you this week and every week that if you give us a super chat, we will read your comment. So you want to make sure you get your question answered or your comment read, drop us a super chat, and we will work around to it. Jesse, sir, how are you doing?
Well, the team I cover for a living is 4-4, coming off 3 straight losses. My favorite professional football team is the Dallas Cowboys, who are the second biggest dumpster fire in the NFL, only second to the New York Jets. But I have a couple things going for me, Parker. The Giants are losing right now, and the Oklahoma City Thunder are 3-0. So with things as bad as they have been for some aspects of my sports life, it's all about the little wins, Parker, and that's what I'm
Well,
into
apparently
right
you
now.
skipped Women's Basketball Media Day today, which I just found out 2 hours ago. Jenny Baranchek's squad is the one thing. It might be the one thing that's going to give us all some hope through this dark winter to come, and you can't even be bothered to care.
Look, women's basketball genuinely is going to be a beacon of light. It might be the only beacon of light for some Sooner fans. There will be some women's basketball coverage on at OU Insider this week, Parker. But it's a busy week. We've got a basketball scrimmage on Wednesday. We just left football availability. We've got the Battle of the Gassos for softball on Friday, so that's going to be fun. And Parker, there's only one of me. I can't, I can't get to everything. I'm not perfect. I am humble enough to say that I'm not perfect.
There's
I'm not
only
perfect.
one of you.
That's right.
Is this verified? I'm going to howmanyofme.com right now to discover whether there is indeed only one Jesse Crittenden.
There's a Crittenden County, as we saw just a little bit outside of Oxford, Mississippi. So maybe there's a bunch of Jesse Crittendens in Crittenden County.
This man, full of lies. There are 107 Jesse Crittendens known to the human race. Now, you might be the
107?
most famous of them, but do not engage in the erasure of the other 106 Jesse Crittendens.
Those other 106s need to change their name now because they're never going to live up to the incredibly high standard that I have set for my name, first and last name. They might as well change their name now, Parker. I'm actually going to make it my life's quest to seek out the rest of the 106 and bully them to change their name.
Boomer
That's my goal.
129 in the chat said, remember when Jesse started at OU Insider and he was allergic to barber shops?
That's what I remember, Parker. The first few click slants we did, that was half the comments was Jesse, get a haircut. And it took me a year, but I finally listened to the good old folks that comment on our videos.
Would you say you're better off for it?
I would, and I think
Good.
I think the OU Insider subscribers, they know us better than we know ourselves, and they were right. They were right.
All right, so let's dive in. We're going to hear from Brent Venables tomorrow morning. We heard from Brent Venables this evening via his coach's show over at Rudy's. We're going to have his press conference in the morning. Hopefully, they'll serve us all Boomerang Diner again like they did last week. Boomerang Diner is far superior to the other catering options that are genuinely offered to us throughout the year. I'm not afraid, not ashamed to say it. Boomerang is supreme. But Jesse, One of the things that Brent Venables brought to our attention, and it's not surprising, but one of the things that he brought to our attention at the coaches show tonight is that Oklahoma plans to utilize freshman offensive tackle Isaiah Autry-Dent. Well, I shouldn't say they plan to utilize him. They plan to elevate him. He's coming up to the two deep, coming off the scout team for this week, going into the Maine game. And this is one guy, Jesse, that I would really like to see on the field simply because the tackle play outside of Jacob Sexton and Michael Tarquin has been so awful at Oklahoma this season that it feels like almost anything is an upgrade. I'm not saying Isaiah Autry-Dent will be. Maybe he will be a turnstile just like Logan Howland was on Saturday, but you kind of have to give him that chance at this point because the rest of this season is about building towards 2025 primarily. There's not much left to salvage of this campaign, but if you can work Isaiah Autry-Dent into some kind of role and give him some live game reps this weekend against Maine, well, then maybe, just maybe, he's a guy that can prove, as Caden Green did last year against Texas, that he's ready for more of a role and is worthy of more trust down the home stretch for the Sooners in SEC play.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of why, I mean, I asked Brent Venables on the SEC teleconference last week about the young freshman offensive lineman, and I asked specifically about Eddie Pierre-Louis. But part of that question, Parker, is because things have been so bad on the offensive line. And I think, Parker, I don't know what you think of this, but I think OU is in a weirdly good opportunity to, like, because normally you would think, well, if you start playing the young offensive lineman, usually it's such a big transition from high school to college. Most offensive linemen aren't ready to make that jump, that's a signal that you're punting on the season. OU's kind of in a weird position right now where things have been so bad on the offensive line that you can almost make both arguments that elevating someone like Autry-Dent could be both developing towards the future and also could potentially help things get better right now. And part of that is obviously that Jacob Sexton is out. I don't think Logan Howland has shown nearly enough to suggest that he's ready for this. And Parker, I like to quote you to say that don't ever say it can't get worse. Things can always get worse. But I think if you're Oklahoma at this point, you kind of can play both angles. You can try to utilize these freshmen to develop them for the future, and also maybe they give you a spark now. And here's the other thing, Parker. Eddie Pierre-Louis has played in one game, but most of those freshman offensive linemen haven't played yet. If you want to redshirt them, which we've talked about this, I don't even know how important red shirts are these days for a lot of players, but even if the coaching staff still wants to do that, you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can play guys. This Maine game is a perfect opportunity, and then you can see, hey, is someone like Autry-Dent, should we play him at Missouri, Alabama, LSU? It's a move that I really like. I hope it's not just Autry-Dent. I hope they look at the other freshman O-line, and this Maine game is a perfect opportunity to give him some snaps.
Shoot, man, I'd play many, many second teamers against Maine from a very early stage in the football game too, because this is as good as of an opportunity as you're going to have for the rest of the season to get guys like Isaiah Autry-Dent and Eddie Pierre-Louis. And shoot, you want to flip over to the other side of the ball, somebody like Reggie Powers or somebody like Danny Okoye, some extended time on the field. More than likely, that's not happening against Missouri or Alabama or LSU. I mean, it could happen against Alabama. You could be down by 50 in the fourth quarter. That's very much on the table. So that would be about the only other juncture at which it would make sense to deploy those young guys. But I think you got to see what you have in the proverbial quiver for next season this weekend against Maine. You would hope that the first team guys can stake you to a multi-possession lead by the end of the first quarter. And then from there, it should be easy sailing. Like this ought to be a game, and I imagine it will be, where you can just rely on your athletic superiority and coast. There's no reason why Maine should hang with Oklahoma. No reason whatsoever. Tim Martin threw us a super chat worth $5. Thank you, Tim. And he said, I love BV, but he has to get the next OC right. Amen to that, Tim. And it's fair to say, Jesse, we've continued to say it. It is not an exaggeration to assert that Brent Venables' tenure as Oklahoma's head coach is going to live or die with his next offensive coordinator hire. That will be the most pivotal hire he has ever made.
No, it is in such a variety of facets, right, Parker? Because you're not only making this hire to try to fix what I mean. Brent Venables said today on his coaches show, being 4-4 is unacceptable, and it's so bad and could get worse to the point where you can't really have anything off the table. I think you can't have preconceived notions of who you're looking for with this hire. So it's not only about bringing in someone that you're confident can help turn things around, but at the same time, Parker, I think you need to bring in somebody that you think can be a part of this program on this coaching staff for years to come. This can't be a 1-year rental. This can't be a 1 to 2 year hire. I think it's not only about getting this fixed as quick as possible, but Parker, he needs somebody to come in that can take things over on offense. Now, you and I have both talked about how I think Brent Venables is going to have a bigger hand in the offense moving forward, but he needs somebody that can come in that knows their stuff, that hey, they have the pedigree, they have whatever it is to say, hey, I want these guys to come with me, or hey, we need to go get these players, or these are the things we need to do from a game day operation standpoint, from a practice standpoint, and then build on that for years and years. This can't be a Jeff Lebby after 2 years, they're gone type of situation. So, and yeah, Parker, I mean, if this thing gets worse this season, OU is going to be entering the most pivotal offseason they've had since they hired Bob Stoops after the 98 season. So yeah, it is incredibly pivotal. And Parker, I don't know, I was thinking about this earlier, but I think you need, not only is somebody maybe without Oklahoma ties going to be the right call, but I think you need to get a young guy in who can kind of come in and just bring some really fresh ideas and just kind of, it's clear this offense is stale and they need some changes.
Yeah. And man, this is where I'm glad I don't have to make those kinds of decisions, because Brent Venables has to understand, has to know, and yeah, he does, that this is the most important hire he has ever made as a head coach, and you can't get this one wrong. And so there is a lot of pressure that comes along with that. And no doubt there's, like, even if you feel like you have the guy, there's going to be some internal second guessing. There's going to be some uncertainty. Okay, is this really the dude that can revamp our offense and revitalize it for the 2025 season? Because that's what it's about, Jesse. It's not about recruiting. It's not about the future beyond 2025. It is about, can you win football games in 2025? Can you get the offense to a point where they can help you win football games, and a lot of them, in 2025? Because if you don't win next year, there is no 2026, at least not for Brent Venables. And he's a guy that so many folks want to see succeed. Like, and for people like you and I, we root for people in this industry, because you get to know people and get to see who they are away from football, and you come to have a different degree of respect and appreciation for them. And Brent Venables is a legitimately great human being, somebody that's easy to root for. You wish him success, but the success has to manifest quickly at Oklahoma, because I'll tell you, and I had an exchange with a fan on Twitter earlier today that is proof of this. They don't care what type of person you are. They don't care about any of that. How well you recruit. They don't care about how good of a messenger or how good of an ambassador you are. They care about one thing, and that is wins and losses. And if you aren't winning football games, you're history at the University of Oklahoma. That is how it goes. Now, let's see what we have. We have several super chats to catch up on. Boomer Sooner Doc made his very first contribution. Thank you, sir. And he asks, can we keep the recruiting class if we go 5-7? Let me start, Jesse, by kicking this question to you, because it was the question we teased in the thumbnail for this show. What happens if the Sooners go 5-7? Does Venables get a year 4 at that point, especially if down the stretch they lose some of those games by wide margins? Does Oklahoma just say, all right, it's time to cut our losses and move on?
Is that possible? Certainly it is. But Parker, I think the thing that can kind of get lost in discussions like these is you have to realize that this isn't a situation where it's like Brent Venables decides we've got to get rid of Seth Luttrell, right? And it's the middle of the season where you can't do your full OC search right now. So you elevate Joe John Finley and you're doing whatever you can to get through the rest of the season. That the decision to to move on from Brent Venables is going to include a hefty buyout, as everybody knows by now. That's close to $45 million. Not to mention, who are you going to get to come in the door after him? Who are you going to hire to help turn this thing around? And then how many changes are they going to make once that new person comes in the door? So it's not as simple as getting rid of Brent Venables, because it starts a whole chain of events that if you're going to make that move, if the administration is going to make that move, they have to have answers to those questions ready to go. Because as bad as things are right now, Parker, if things don't get handled incredibly well over the next 6 months, this thing can get worse. I'm going to quote you. I'm going to quote me quoting you earlier again. Things can always get worse. So having said that, as bad as this thing could get this season, I still think Brent Venables is going to get a year 4. He is OU through and through. He, like everything you just said, he's a guy that you want to root for. And now that you're in the SEC, it raises the level of urgency. It raises the stakes that much more. And I think adding a head coaching search on top of that maybe only gets more chaotic. So, but it's so hard, Parker, because what if this Maine game this weekend isn't a blowout? What if they go to Missouri? What if they play Bama? What if they play LSU and they're just not competitive? Because that's the hard thing right now, Parker, is this is a 4-4 football team that hasn't been very competitive. I think Brent Venables by almost every metric is going to get another season. But if it's 5-7, that I think that would certainly mean, obviously, that he enters next season on the hot seat, but that certainly means that it's not a guarantee he finishes next season. And by that point, I think this administration puts together a plan of what that looks like if they move on from him. So, and then the other thing I'll say, Parker, before I kick it back to you, is I think if they go 5-7, Seth Luttrell's not going to be the only coach out the door. I mean, that's almost a given. That's almost a given.
To your initial question, Boomer Sooner Doc, yes. Okay. Well, no, I shouldn't say yes. The answer is indeterminate. Now, I don't know. I see if Oklahoma goes 5-7, I don't know what the exact circumstances look like at that point. Now, what I mean by that is it a 5-7 where you're cleaning house and getting rid of most of the coaches on the staff or potentially all the coaches on the offensive side of the ball and just starting with a clean slate? That 5-7 is a very different 5-7 from a 5-7 where you're only replacing the OC and keeping all the assistants. Because honestly, I think a lot of whether or not Oklahoma can hang on to the recruiting class or not is riding less on what the eventual record is and more on how many of these assistants are retained. Because, for instance, if there is a world where the offensive coordinator, whoever he may be, swings through the doors in December and wants to bring his own receivers coach on board, or he himself is a receivers coach and has a desire to coach that position at Oklahoma, and you're parting ways with Emmett Jones, I promise you, Oklahoma will lose multiple wide receiver commits at that point. Now, it's not to say you'd lose them permanently. Perhaps you could re-recruit those guys, remind them of all the reasons why they chose Oklahoma in the first place, and then they lock back in. But a major reason, if not the primary reason, why many of these guys chose Oklahoma is because of Emmett Jones. Manny Choice, for instance, he's a Sooner because Emmett Jones was the very first coach to believe in him. Similar thing with Grayson Harris down there in Ennis, Texas. The reason he's an Oklahoma Sooner, Emmett Jones was the very first coach to offer him a scholarship all the way back in the fall of 2021 when he was still on staff at Kansas. So it's not about the record at this point. Maybe that's not the answer you want to hear. Maybe that feels like I'm dancing around the question, but I just think that's the reality. Ultimately, it's less about the record and it's more about what the staff looks like come December once the new OC is on board. Now,
Parker, just to really quick, that's the other part of this too, is we really don't know. And to quickly expand on what you said, it's going to really depend on what this OC hire looks like, because whoever they hire could have potentially a lot of leverage. Parker, like you just said, if you're coming into a 5-7 program, they're going to know what the stakes are. And that's going to give somebody more of an opportunity to say, I want to bring in this guy. I want to bring in this guy. So basically, Parker, there's so much could be different a month from now, and there's a lot of different ways this thing could go. That's the reality of it.
Yeah. Mongo 5817, who is a regular, threw us $10. He said SEC Shorts nails it again with OU. Shout out to Justin Heineke, who is, of course, the father of Owen Heineke. I have not seen the SEC Shorts this week. Have you, Jesse?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, man. I'll have to take a look once we get off the air. I can't imagine OU is portrayed all too positively in SEC Shorts. They are the laughing stock of the league right now. That is the harsh reality because people expected Mississippi State to be bad, right? People kind of expected that Auburn might be a train wreck. Nobody really expected Oklahoma to be where they are right now, having lost 3 straight games by double digits and being that close, Jesse, that close to 0-5 in SEC play because Auburn should have beat them.
Yes.
Auburn should have beat them.
Yes, they should have. And that's what we talked about on the ride home, Parker, is as bad as this feels right now. How much worse would it feel if this program is 3-5, 0-5 in comp? They are a Peyton Thorne peeing down his legs away from a 3-5 record. That's where this football program's at right now.
Great question from John Schlegel, who threw us $2. Thank you, John. He asked, and I'll let you take a crack at this one first, Jesse. Is Bill Beatonbow untouchable with this OC hire?
No. He's for a bunch of different reasons. For one, look, Bill Beatonbow is obviously a big discussion right now, and reasonably so among OU fans. And as much as things have been really tough for this offense when it comes to how much they've leaned on portal guys and how the injuries at wide receiver, all that's like, you can't look at the product on the field right now and say it's acceptable because it's not. It's just not. This is OU. Parker, OU is 4 sacks away from giving up the most sacks in a season in program history. OU gave up 20 sacks all of last season. They've given up 25 the last 3 games. You can't look at any of this. It almost doesn't matter how good recruiting has been or how good his offensive line have been in the past and whether that's fair or not fair. It's you can't look at it that way. And because things are so dire, I think one of the things you're going to have to tell an offensive coordinator coming in here is, I mean, yeah, Brent's going to have to decide who's untouchable and who's not, but I don't think you can afford to leave too many guys untouchable with an offense this bad and with an urgency to fix this right away. So that's not to say that's not advocating that he should be fired. That's not advocating that he shouldn't be back next year. It's just if the question is he untouchable? The answer is no. He's just not.
Hey, to our social folks who are behind the screen right now, go ahead, make the edit, quote Jesse on that. Bill Beatonbow should be fired. Go ahead, put that out there on Twitter. Blast it to the universe. That is the correct answer. And Jesse said it very well. There's not a whole lot I can add to that. From where I stand, no one is untouchable. And that's just kind of the harsh reality. Like, there are guys, and Emmett Jones is a great example, right? There's absolutely no reason why you would voluntarily fire Emmett Jones. There's no reason why you would have Emmett Jones walk into your office and say, you're gone, pack your bags. But if you're going to bring in a top-of-the-line OC, a top-of-the-line OC is not going to take the job at Oklahoma if he's given a list of provisions and he's, or I should say, given a list of non-negotiables. Oh, you come in, you're not allowed to touch the offensive line coach. Or, oh, you come in, you have to keep the wide receivers coach on staff. No, if you're going to bring in a top-of-the-line OC, part of the negotiation process is, well, maybe it's not part of the process, but it's going to be understood that if that OC comes in and takes a job at Oklahoma, they're going to be able to exert a tremendous amount of control over their offensive staff and construct it according to their preferences. And that may not involve Bill Beatonbow. That may not involve Emmett Jones or DeMarco Murray or Joe John Finley. Now, DMAC told a really compelling story last week on the live stream where he said, look, we got here to OU and the winter of 99, right after Bob Stoops took the job, and Sam Pittman was on staff as the O-line coach, and he's a great coach and remains a great coach to this day, but he just didn't fit what Stoops wanted to do with his staffing. And so he was out of a job at Oklahoma. So all that to say, whoever your next OC is, it's going to come down to, would he rather have Emmett Jones on staff than the wide receiver coach of his dreams or his vision, if you will? Would he rather have Bill Bedenbaugh on staff as his offensive line coach than whatever offensive line coach he has the hard eyes for, if you will? It's all contingent upon who the next OC hire is. And that could be a guy with connections to some of these assistants. It could be some guy that has absolutely no connection to OU or any of the current staffers whatsoever. A guy like Mike Shanahan at Indiana, or a guy like Andy Kolnicki at Penn State, right? Like, you can't really be too scrupulous with your criteria when it is such a desperate, well, maybe desperate isn't the right word. Maybe it is the right word. You have to win in 2025. And so when you have to win, you can't go looking for hires that mesh, right? You can't really go looking for hires that fit with what you want to do. No, you have to go hire a dang good guy for the job, trust his offensive prowess and his mind as a play caller, and also trust that he's going to assemble an offensive staff that is going to be conducive to the success of the unit and ultimately the program. Jacob Matthews threw us $5. Thank you, Jacob. He said, when we get a new OC, is there coaches on the OU staff we keep no matter what, or let the OC pick all new guys? Well, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the previous question. It's going to depend on the OC's preferences, and without knowing who the OC is and what his vision is and what type of scheme he runs and what type of personnel he wants to deploy on a snap-by-snap basis, it's not all that clear. And so that's a question that will be answered pretty summarily after the regular season ends, because I would expect, and I said this on the podcast the other day, Oklahoma will probably have their next offensive coordinator hired no less than 48 hours after the regular season ends. There's no reason for it to take any longer than that, because you're going to have 6-7 weeks by the time the regular season concludes on November 30th to have lined everything up such that you can make your desired hire immediately upon the conclusion of the regular season. Now, maybe the guy you have in mind is somebody that's coaching in a conference championship game first week of December. That would be maybe the one thing that could postpone that announcement. But my expectation would be no less than 48 hours after the Sooners walk off the field in Baton Rouge on November 30th, the next offensive coordinator is formally announced.
I think the thing I'll add to that, Parker, real quick, and it's what we talked about, but the succinct way to put it is, when you're bringing in someone to fix an offense this poorly with the urgency that Oklahoma is going to have to fix it right away, you not only can't assume anything, but Brent Venables is not going to necessarily be in a position to say all of that much. Like you said, he's not going to be in a position to have non-negotiables. This is a really unique situation for Oklahoma to be in, but this isn't just a bad offense in the SEC. This is one of the worst offenses in the country. And if you're a new OC, you're going to feel that urgency to fix it right away. And that could include a bunch of guys you want to bring with you, and it may not, but we'll find out. We'll find out, but the offense is so bad that you can't assume anything.
Jason said, please stop hyping up Emmett Jones. He hasn't done crap. Okay, well, I can't convince someone like that of anything. So you have your opinion on Emmett Jones. I have mine. I tend to think that man is one of the best recruiters and one of the best developers of talent that you could possibly hope to have on staff as your wide receivers coach. But if you don't share that perspective, you're not obligated to. You're entitled to your opinion. AJD threw us $5 and said, do you think all the receivers will come back? Well, at this point, Jesse, there is no reason why Jalil Farouk wouldn't come back, because you're not going to rush him back this weekend against Maine. There's no reason to. At that point in time, he can play versus Missouri. He can play versus Alabama. He can play versus LSU. He can play the bowl game. And this season does not cost him his final year of eligibility. He can get a medical waiver. He can come back in 2025. He'll qualify for it. That won't even be a discussion. The NCAA will grant him an additional year. So, yes, Jalil Farouk will be back. There is no reason right now to think that Nick Anderson won't be back, that Jaden Gibson won't be back. Brent Venables has said Andrell Anthony is coming back. So if you were worried about portal possibilities there, that's something that the head ball coach has offered a rejoinder to, if you will. And as far as Deion Burks is concerned, that's an interesting situation because he's maybe the one guy that if he really, really wanted to, he could go bet on himself based on what he's already put on tape, and he could enter the NFL draft and have hopes of hearing his name called. But would he, after a season that's been plagued by injuries, and that, save for the opener against Temple when he caught 3 touchdowns, he hadn't really made the productive dent that you expect a guy like that to make when he's been healthy. So I think there's a very, very good chance, and perhaps even a likelihood, that all 5 of those guys come back. Where things get really, really tricky at that point is with the numbers game, because you're bringing in 5 wide receiver commits that are going to be true freshmen as of right now. I want to say OU has 13 scholarship receivers right this second.
That's right.
You can't carry 18 scholarship receivers. Maybe you can, because maybe the legislation is passed that increases the scholarship limit to 105 rather than 85. Maybe that's what Emmett Jones was banking on when he decided to take 5 in this cycle. But even if you bump that up to 105, 18 still feels like a crap ton, Jesse. So you might have to wave goodbye to a couple of those guys that occupy the room right now that just aren't up to par with their peers.
No, and I think when you say that, I think everybody's going to have a couple of names in mind as to who may fit that category. The reality is, I don't think there's any reason to think all 5 of those guys who have missed time won't come back. I don't think there's any reason to not be optimistic about that. And we'll do some check-ins as we get closer to the season about where things might stand. But this is, Parker, I'm going to say it again, and don't mean to repeat myself. So much can change week to week in college football, let alone how much different are things going to feel now and a month from now. How does the end of the season affect things? How does the OC search affect things? How does any activity in the transfer portal, both leaving Oklahoma and coming to Oklahoma, change things? There's always, and with a season like this, it just adds to the chaos and unpredictability. But having said that, I don't think Oklahoma is going to be in a position to want to lose those guys. Brent Venables has said all 5 of those guys have expressed a desire to come back. I don't think there's any reason to not be optimistic, but you never know when you're dealing with a 4-4 football program who's staring a potential 5-7 season and a new OC search down the barrel. It just adds to the unpredictability.
Bagman in the chat says, why does OU Insider overinflate the value of these I don't think we overinflate the value of these coaches. I think it is completely reasonable to state that Bill Bedenbaugh and Emmett Jones are amongst the best at their craft in the profession. Like, that's I think that's pretty objective. And we also just got done saying no one on this offensive staff is untouchable. So I don't think we're overinflating the value of any singular coach if we're straight up saying, hey, there's no coach on the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma that can count on having their job next year because of the circumstances. Boomer Sooner Doc threw us $10 and said, how much the NIL game is played by large donors versus smaller normal fan donors? And has a coach had a year 3 like this and turned it around? Yes, there is a coach that has had a year 3 like this and turned it around. His name is William Christopher Swinney, better known as Dabo. And of course, that is one of Brent's mentors. If you go back, and I'm going to read you Dabo's resume through the first 3 years of his tenure at Clemson, the first of which he took over midseason, so it's not an exact apples-to-apples comparison. But his first year on the job, he coached 7 games. Clemson went 4-3 under his direction. Second year, 2009, 9-5. Third year, he went 6-7. Now here's what happened after that. 10-4, 11-2, 11-2, 10-3, 14-1, 14-1, and a national championship. 12-2, 15-0, and a national championship. 14-1, 10-2, 10-3, 11-3, 9-4. And this year, 6-1. So, yes, there is precedent for a guy like Brent Venables having a subpar year 3 and then being able to go and turn it around and have great and sustained success. Now, obviously, college football today is much different than it was 15 years ago. So you can make the argument that what Dabo did, turning Clemson from a 6-7 team in 2010 to a double-digit win team literally every single year thereafter until last season, is not as replicable today. And that's fair, but there's two very distinct ways, two very distinct sides of the coin. You can say it's more difficult just because of the way the game has changed. I think you can also argue it's easier because of how much easier it is to revamp a roster in a single offseason via the transfer portal. Now, I think one of the uncomfortable realities of Oklahoma's current situation is that they're going to have to employ some measures in order to revamp their roster as such that maybe they didn't initially want to employ. Like, I don't think Brent Venables is the type of guy that wants to be going and throwing huge bags at offensive linemen in the transfer portal. But hey, you want to keep your job after 2025? You're probably not going to have much of a choice this offseason. Brent Venables probably isn't a guy that wants to be spending with the absolute cream of the crop in college football when it comes to NIL payroll. He probably didn't want to be spending with the high rollers in that sense at Oklahoma. But again, I don't think you're going to have much of a choice in 2025 if you want to keep your job. So, and to answer your first question there, Boomer Sooner Doc, how much the NIL game is played by large donors versus smaller normal fan donors? 80-20 split, I would say. Yes, fans and small-time donors can make an impact, but ultimately it's the people with a lot of money in their bank accounts that can make a substantial difference in whether or not a program is able to compete financially with the top schools in the country as far as NIL spending. Now, once you have the once you have the money, you actually have to go and spend it, right? And again, that's kind of what I was getting at with my original point. There is, I think Oklahoma's going to have the money, but there's going to have to be a willingness to go and spend it that maybe there hasn't been, or maybe there's been a reticence to do in the last couple of years because of the concerns about culture across the program, which is a fair concern, but you got to throw caution to the wind and put the pedal to the metal. Again, this offseason, if you're Oklahoma and you're this coaching staff and you want to be able to see this thing through beyond 2025.
I would just say again that I think when you're Brent Venables has talked, if nothing else, about how he wants people to commit to the University of Oklahoma because they love the University of Oklahoma, right, Parker? I mean, that's something he has said a billion times since he's been hired. He has said it a billion times the last couple of weeks. I think this offseason, assuming Brent Venables gets another shot, which I think he will, this is really going to come down to that balance of Brent and what he wants this program to be and how he wants to build it and the type of motivations he wants recruits and transfer portal guys to have when they come to Oklahoma. It's the balance between wanting that and then having to kind of play the game in some sorts. And when you're a 4-4 team that could finish 6-6 and 5-7, it's going to be hard not to play the game. And that's just where Oklahoma's at right now. Plus, you're in the SEC. You can't bank on the Big 12 schedule of old where you're going to have more talent and you should be able to claw your way to 10 wins. That's not what Oklahoma's looking at.
Another $10 from Jacob Matthews. Thank you, Jacob. We appreciate you immensely. He said, I've been seeing people say that if we get James Coley, we could get players from Georgia. How much stock do you put into us getting players from the OC's former school, whoever that is? I mean, it's convenient if you manage to hire an OC that has a cavalcade of players waiting to follow him wherever he goes, kind of like Kurt Signetti and Mike Shanahan had when they made the move from James Madison to Indiana. But I don't think it's a necessity. Like, if you're really splitting hairs between OC candidates, I don't think you're going to give preference to a guy because, oh, he has XYZ players lined up to follow him in the transfer portal if we hire him. Unless maybe you have unquestionably a couple of the top players in college football, and that might be enough to tip the scales. If you're looking at adding two All-American candidates, 2 or 3 All-American candidates to your roster, if you hire a given OC, then okay. I can see the appeal there. But in this day and age, when the portal is immediately accessible to any student athlete at any time, and there are no longer any restrictions on how many times you can jump in. Like here's the thing that nobody wants to talk about, Jesse, because it's kind of taboo. There are a lot of backroom deals that get struck to get guys in the portal in the first place. There's a reason why you see so many guys get in the portal and immediately choose another school, because the deal's already done, the deal's already brokered before they even get in the portal. And this is part of the dirty game nowadays, and it gets played all over the place. And again, this might be something that Oklahoma has to engage in to a certain extent. Maybe there isn't, and maybe there isn't a wondrously gifted difference maker in the portal on the offensive line. Maybe you have to work the back channels and try to talk a guy into getting into the transfer portal, because this happens, right? We all know it happens. OU was victimized by it last winter. And so again, this is not something that I don't think anybody in that Oklahoma building wants to get involved with, but if you can't beat them, join them, as the saying goes. And that might be one of the things you have to do if you want to be able to solidify a couple of your weaker position groups towards a championship run, or not even a championship run in 2025, but just a run back to relevance. Let's see what else we have here. Give me one moment. Yes, here we go. Travis Adair, he says, go get Bobby Petrino. Travis Adair wants to hire Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator. Thoughts, Mr. Crittenden?
Can you imagine? Can you imagine Bobby Petrino in Norman, Oklahoma? And that, can you imagine? Hey, this is what I'll say. Brent Venables has got to go get the best guy he thinks he can go get. If Bobby Petrino's that guy, Parker, we're staring a 5-7 season down the barrel. Why not get as weird? Why don't we get as weird and wild with it as possible? That's what I say.
Let's
just get crazy with it. Let's get crazy.
That would certainly be weird and wild. Bobby Petrino in Norman, America.
Can you imagine?
What a time that would be. That introductory press conference would be must-see content.
Oh, yeah.
AJD asked, and he gave us $5. Thank you, AJD. He asked, who has been the most disappointing player this season? Kenai Walker. Next question. I'm not going to elaborate because I already did to a great extent on the podcast and on the radio airwaves. So thoughts, Jesse, your opinion on who the most disappointing player has been?
You took the most obvious answer with Kenai Walker, because I think that secondary group has been rough overall. Disappointing from a production standpoint. It's so hard to register it because you can't look at the stats with the offensive line. Like, it doesn't tell as much of a story as it does with other guys. But Parker, I'll say the transfer portal offensive lineman as a whole, and I'll specify Fabechi Wiwu. Just because these are guys that Oklahoma wanted to bring here. And and look, you could trace back year after year after year as to how Oklahoma's offensive line got to where it is now. And there's so many things that you could look back to, but the reality is that offensive line has been leaning on transfer portal guys that they needed and expected more from, and that just hasn't happened. And when given the fact that Fabechi Wiwu has actually been the biggest staple of this offensive line, I think he's played the most snaps this season. It just hasn't been good enough, and that's the reality. It just hasn't been good enough.
David Chamberlain gave us $10. Thank you, David. It is his 10th contribution to this channel. A regular. We appreciate you, sir. He says, go watch the video Jay just put out over at Unfair Sports about the O-line situation. Go watch it before you, the fans, start attacking Bill Bedenbaugh. Jay does a lot of fact-checking. Great stuff. Yes, Jay's a very intelligent guy. Friend of the program, friend of the site. Fully endorse all of the things that they do over there at Unfair Sports. So, we're about 15 minutes from wrapping up the live stream. So if you need something to do afterwards, head on over to their channel and certainly check it out. I myself will probably add it to my watch list. I have not seen it yet, but really curious to hear his thoughts on the O-line situation and the fact checking that David referenced. Ultimately, and I know nobody wants to hear this, I've said it a lot, and I'll continue to say it. Bill Bedenbaugh doesn't write the checks, and because he doesn't write the checks, there's only so much that he's going to be able to do in terms of talent acquisition. And so you can be mad at Bill Bedenbaugh for underdeveloping guys, and that's fine. Like, certainly there are some instances where uh, OU didn't get the most out of guys that they probably could have gotten more out of, or an XYZ dude just didn't live up to the bill. Okay, that's fine. Is that on Bill Bedenbaugh? I don't know. We may never know, because, for instance, there have been guys over the years, and Bray Walker is a perfect example. Bray Walker just didn't want to get any better. There's nothing Bill Bedenbaugh can do for a guy like that, right? A guy that just isn't taking football seriously, not as seriously as he should be if he wants to be a starting offensive lineman at the University of Oklahoma. So it's a tricky game. It's tricky to evaluate offensive linemen. It's absolutely the hardest position to evaluate coming out of high school. I think Bill Bedenbaugh does as good a job as anybody. He certainly has misses, as does every offensive line coach in the country. But you go back to what Oklahoma did this past season this past offseason, excuse me, in the portal cycle. They brought in Spencer Brown, Michael Tarquin, Fabechi Wiwu, Garen Hatchett, Branson Hickman. Branson Hickman was the top available center in the spring portal. If you were going to go get a guy to play center, that was the guy you were going to get, and Bill Bedenbaugh got him. Tarquin, Wiwu, Hatchett, all guys with plenty of starting experience. Spencer Brown was just a straight whiff. Like, we can acknowledge that. That was the first guy Bill Bedenbaugh went after, and swing and a miss on that one. No defending that acquisition by Bill Bedenbaugh. But ultimately, we don't know, and we probably won't know with Hatchett until 2025, because even when he did play at the very beginning of the season for Oklahoma, he was playing with one arm. I feel bad for Tarquin. I think he's better than what the tape would indicate right now, and he and Jacob Sexton have been in similar situations where they've just been bouncing around so frequently, Sexton between guard and tackle and Tarquin between the two tackle positions, that he's just never really had a chance to get settled and get into a rhythm and hammer down the footwork that is required, snap in and snap out, to effectively pass protect at his position, because you got to reverse everything going from the left side to the right side. And Wiwu's been fine, like, not spectacular, not bad, not a liability, just kind of fine. And ultimately, he has not been amongst the chief problems for this unit. All that to say, you look at that haul, it's decent, and decent wasn't good enough for Oklahoma. But if it's going to be better than decent, there has to be a willingness from the NIL side to shell out more money than Oklahoma did shell out this past offseason. Their focus was defensive line, and that's understandable. Their focus this coming offseason absolutely has to be offensive line. And I think that's a message that is pretty well received and understood by everybody involved with that operation, that they're going to have to spend, and that they will spend in the offense or in the portal for elite offensive linemen. Ryan Meyer, $10
So
from Ryan.
I'm going to give real credit to Fabechi Wiwu. Great name. It's a great name. Wiwu. It's a great name. Sorry, that's just an aside.
You're good. You're good. Ryan Meyer gave us $10. Do you guys think if we get a somewhat serviceable O-line and return guys like Burks, Barnes, etc., this team has enough talent to win 9-10 games next year? Because I don't see the D dropping off anyway. It's all contingent upon the offensive line in my mind, because like, it's hard to project what that offense looks like personnel wise, because you're going to be bringing in a new OC, and who the heck knows what happens with those two quarterbacks, Jackson Arnold, Michael Hawkins. Heck, your new OC, like, say you hire Joe Craddock at Tulane, I can almost promise you he'll be bringing Darian Mensah with him. And so who knows who is playing quarterback for Oklahoma in 2025? I do not right now. And if you say you do, you're lying, because there are all sorts of ways that thing could go this offseason. based upon what happens in the portal, both inbound and outbound. So, as far as the skill positions are concerned, I feel good about what Oklahoma is going to bring back and what they're going to have available. You would figure Javante Barnes returns. You'd figure Gavin Sawchuk returns. Taylor Tatum's going to be a year older and a year wiser. And he needs to be a year wiser much more so than he needs to be a year older right now. It's about the focus on the little things right now for Taylor Tatum. That's the only thing that's holding him back, blocking, ball security, and the like. But they're going to have a really, really strong skill position group. They probably need another tight end. They're losing Jake Roberts. Trinae Washington, I don't think is going to be ready to contribute as a true freshman. You probably have to go to the portal for another tight end. Now, that all of that to say, the offensive line is the one group where I don't have a clue what it looks like. I think whoever is starting at quarterback for Oklahoma in 2025 is going to be capable. There's going to be a reason they get tabbed as the starter at the University of Oklahoma. They will have won the job outright. And so I trust that quarterback play is going to be strong. I trust that skill position play is going to be strong. I don't know what to think of the offensive line because I have no idea what it looks like. And I do think, Jesse, I mean, this is maybe an unpopular take. In fact, it probably is. It's probably going to sound like sunshine pumping to some people. I think the defense actually has the potential to be better next year than it is here in 2024. I think there is absolutely the potential for the defense to level up because I think the overall caliber of athlete that you're going to trot out there in 2025 on the defensive side of the ball is going to exceed the level of talent that you're trotting out there at several positions here in 2024. For instance, you're going to upgrade from Kenai Walker, right? That there's one right there. I think you're going to upgrade from, well, so you get Kendall Dolby back. So that's an immediate upgrade at Cheetah over what you have right now, which has been a lot of Woody Washington. He's been middling. So, yes, you lose Danny Stutzman. Yes, you lose Billy Bowman. Yes, you lose Ethan Downs. I think you're going to have guys that are ready to step into their former roles and excel. I look at Lewis Carter at linebacker as somebody that I think is ready for more responsibility. In the back end, that safety room, Robert Spears Jennings is going to be a senior. Peyton Bowen's going to be a junior. Michael Boganowski kind of feels like the guy that's next up, and Reggie Powers is right there in that conversation with him. Jaden Hardy has seen the field quite a bit. So I think, and not to get long-winded here, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think there's absolutely the potential that the defense takes another step forward in 2025, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that Oklahoma jumps right back into the ranks of double-digit winners next season. But all of that to me lives or dies with how the offensive line looks and how they play.
It's the question I posed to you on the long drive back from Memphis on Saturday was, I mean, what are the chances that this defense can be better? Because you are losing Stutzman and Billy Bowman and a guy like Woody Washington, which that's more of a veteran thing and less of a on-field production thing this year. That Cheetah experiment has just been very poor. Anyways, you're losing not only what they bring on the field, but you're losing that veteran experience of guys who are leaders, not only for the defense, but for this team. So in addition to that, you're going to be relying on a lot of young guys next year, which obviously adds in a variable. But in terms of potential, in terms of what the ceiling of the defense could be next year, yeah, it absolutely could be higher than what it even is right now. If you're getting a year jump from guys like Eli Bowen and Jaden Jackson, and if David Stone can take a leap or can take a step. You mentioned, I mean, I had looked at someone like Robert Spears Jennings as maybe someone who could jump to the NFL. I think now you probably come back for another year. There's all kinds of guys. You could go through the roster and say with those guys that are returning plus some of these other young guys, yeah, it could absolutely be higher. I think the thing for me, Parker, is again, this is so hard to project forward because what's going to happen this offseason, not only in terms of how good is the offense going to be, but who enters the portal. Are there any unexpected names? Are there any guys that are just expected and you move on? Or are there guys that enter the portal that it hurts that it's going to be tough to replace them? So there's obviously going to be stuff that we got to figure out. But in terms of what the ceiling of this defense could be, it might be higher next year than it is right now.
Well, and we got $5 from T-Bail, who quickly retracted his message. Thank you for the contribution. But the chat was asking, is Dominic Williams back in 2025? And preseason, we were all saying, Jesse, it's probably good if Dominic Williams isn't back in
Yeah.
2025 because that means he balled out and was an absolute menace in the interior for Oklahoma. This Dominic Williams has been good. He has been good for Oklahoma in 2024. Has he been a star? No, not necessarily. And so, does Dominic Williams want to bet on himself at season's end? Does he want to take what he's put on tape and take his chances in the NFL draft? And I think he's obviously, like, if he were to enter the draft, he would get selected. It's a question of how early would he get selected? Does it make more financial sense in his mind to just cash in his chips, enter the draft early, or come back in 2025 and build his draft stock up even further? And so he can come back. He's got an additional year of eligibility. He is a true junior right now. I'm kind of the belief right now, Jesse, that though he has played well, since he hasn't been an all-out stud on the interior, I kind of lean in the direction of him coming back to run it back for one more season at Oklahoma, especially if this season finishes out the way we expect it to, man, and they're 5-7 or 6-7 or 7-6, whatever it may be. I think there's going to be some motivation for Dominic Williams to return and help elevate this program in his final season as a college football player.
No, I agree. And I would say, look, he was among a list of a couple of guys that either before the season or early in the season, I thought, yeah, those guys are going to go to the NFL. And Dominic Williams was one of them. The way Robert Spears-Jennings, the stats he was getting, I mentioned him earlier, I thought he might be a guy that could make a jump. And even R. Mason Thomas, the numbers he was putting up early in the season. Yeah, I thought those are the type of names that you might hear of guys who will skip out on future eligibility and move on. But Parker, especially on the defensive line, this defensive line has been pretty dang solid this year. It's been pretty good, but that hasn't been because of one superstar guy. It's not like South Carolina where you've got the clear cut first round draft picks on your edge, like on your edges. This defensive line has been solid because it's been a collective effort with a bunch of solid guys who are playing pretty well together. But none of those guys have been superstars. So all of that is to say, Parker, I don't see a ton of guys on this defense that it makes a ton of sense for them to jump. I think there's most guys. If there's any questions on some guys, I'm probably going to lean towards it's going to make more sense to come back. Like it's going to make more sense for him to come back. R. Mason Thomas, Robert Spears-Jennings. It's going to make sense for guys like that to come back another year.
And you know who just continually flies under the radar? And I think it's great because I think this dude is building towards being one of the absolute best defensive linemen in college football come his senior year. Grayson Halton is going to be a major cornerstone for this program in 2025. And he put it out there on Twitter about a week ago. He said, I'm always going to be in that A gap with BV. And that tells you he is 10 toes down for the University of Oklahoma. I don't think he's going to quite have the draft stock to even think about jumping after his junior year. But, man, what that dude could do as a senior at Oklahoma excites me and should excite everybody because the potential there is through the freaking roof.
He's been OU's best defensive lineman this year. I think bar none.
I would agree.
I think he has been. And he is one guy, because there's always hype season around some guys in the spring and in the offseason, but we talked up Grayson Halton, and that has proven true. He has had a really, really good year. And I think one more year with a year like this, or maybe better, I think he could go early in the draft. I do. He has been fantastic this year.
All right, folks, we just hit an hour. That is going to do it for this installment of OU Insider Live. That is Jesse Crittenden. I am Parker Thune. We would highly recommend that you go over to OUinsider.com and snag a subscription. It only costs you a few bucks a month, and it is the best way to stay plugged in with everything that is going on with OU football and recruiting and basketball. Basketball is getting started this week. We have the best basketball insider in the market, and that's not even a debate. Brody Lusk is the man when it comes to procuring basketball intel. Those of you that are members have been treated to his notes on all of OU's secret scrimmages the last couple of weeks. He's got stuff that nobody else in the market does. We're glad to have him. Basketball season's getting started. Fall softball is taking place. There is much to be mindful of, and there's much for us to cover over at ouinsider.com, and we're covering it all for you, going deeper and more in depth with both analysis and intel than anybody else in the OU market. So we hope you'll join us. Hit subscribe. Hit that subscribe button below this video if you have not already subscribed to the channel. That doesn't cost you anything. It just helps us out. And you're never going to miss any of our video content, which we do a lot of on a weekly basis. So that's what you need to do to stay in touch with us, or I should say stay up to date with everything we're doing. If you want to get in touch with us, follow Jesse on Twitter at Jesse Crittenden. Follow me on Twitter at Parker Thune. Super easy, right? Our handles are both just our full names. So go find us on Twitter. Our DMs are open. We'll answer whatever questions you guys have to throw at us. And you get unparalleled access to each of our insights, as well as the insights of Brandon, Brian, Brody, and our whole team if you subscribe over at ouinsider.com. With that, we bid you adieu. Take care, folks.